ABC Radio Australia.
Now, the arrest of an independence campaigner on treason charges is raising concerns that West Papua is on a path to more violence, with hundreds of troops deployed to the disputed Indonesian province. Tension has been high after a high-ranking military leader was killed during a shootout with a pro-independence group last month. Now, Victor Yeimo has been detained over his role in organising anti-racism protests 2 years ago. But Benny Wenda, the chairman of the United Liberation Movement for West Papua, is worried Mr Yeimo's arrest will only lead to further unrest.
Internet cut off almost in Jayapura, in Wamena, and all last 4 days. So this is clear that Indonesia hiding something. I'm calling the media to allow international media allow to West Papua, Oxfam and Red Cross to allow West Papua into West Papua, and international intervention needed.
The Indonesian government has announced a military crackdown and declared all armed groups to be terrorists, including non-violent pro-independence groups. Now, Ralph Regenvanu is Vanuatu's opposition leader and a staunch advocate for West Papua's independence, and he joins me now on the line from Port Vila. Good morning, Mr Regenvanu.
Good morning.
How concerned are you right now about this increased tension in West Papua?
Well, it's very concerning. We've seen the steady ramping up of the military occupation of West Papua over the last few years. Hundreds or thousands more troops coming into the territory. We've seen footage of helicopter gunships strafing the highland villages. Now we've just seen an internet blackout so that news can't be shared on social media, which is one of the main ways we get news out of West Papua, because international media is banned from the whole territory. This violence has been going on for many, many years, 50 years or so, but now it's getting to a new stage with the declaration by the Indonesian authorities that, you know, the rebels are a terrorist group. That designation is very worrying because it normally allows states to then use maximum violence and force and kill people like that. So we've had some statements also from, for example, the chairman of the People's Consultative Assembly of Indonesia, which is like their parliament. And he's quoted as saying, destroy them first, we will discuss human rights matters later. And so with that kind of attitude from the Indonesian government, in the face of widespread condemnation of the human rights abuses that are going on, in the face of 80 states around the world asking for the UN Human Rights Commissioner for Human Rights to pay a visit and do an independent assessment of the human rights situation there, and that request being blocked for 2 years now, almost 2 years now. It seems like something is going on that is going to be a tragedy, a continuing of the genocide that's been going on for many years.
You mentioned there the calls for the UN Human Rights Commissioner to visit West Papua, and as you said, 2 years on, that call hasn't progressed and the UN hasn't visited. Should Pacific Island countries, through the Pacific Islands Forum or the Melanesian Spearhead Group, do more to raise awareness about this issue?
Absolutely. It was the Pacific Island Forum leaders, in fact, at their last leaders summit, which was 2 years ago in Tuvalu, who actually passed the resolution asking for the UN Human Rights Commissioner for Human Rights to visit, and actually they welcomed the invitation by Indonesia for this visit to take place. So in fact, the invitation was put out by Indonesia. The Pacific Island Forum leaders welcomed that and asked it for it to go ahead, and asked for that report, which would be an evidence-based, informed report on the situation of the human rights in West Papua, to be presented to the Pacific leaders at the forum meeting that was supposed to be held last year in August in Vanuatu, which obviously wasn't held because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But now we're, of course, almost 12 months after that date that was set by the Pacific Island Forum leaders, and nothing's happened. So yes, the Pacific Island Forum countries who made the call should be putting pressure on Indonesia, on the world community, the United Nations, to implement what was agreed upon. And also, we've got to remember that the African, Caribbean, Pacific Group, the ACP, which is made up of about 76 states, including Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific, also reaffirmed that resolution. So this is basically half the world calling upon Indonesia to allow the UN Human Rights Commissioner for Human Rights to visit, to make an assessment, and that request has not been granted. So it's up to the world community, and especially the leaders, to ramp up the pressure to make sure that we do get, international media, the UN Human Rights Commissioner, all human rights groups in there to make that assessment, because what we're getting now is two different sides of the story, and we need an independent assessment to actually be able to address what's going on. But we do know that massive human rights violations are happening.
And Mr. Regenvanu, you're quoted in the Vanuatu Daily Post as saying that Vanuatu needs to support West Papua by ensuring that the United Liberation Movement of West Papua's application for full membership in the Melanesian Spearhead Group goes ahead and is listed on the agenda for the MSG leaders meeting. Have you had any further discussions with the Vanuatu government or within your own party about this?
Yes, I've talked to the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister of Vanuatu intends to do exactly that, make sure it is listed on the agenda, and will push for full membership. You've got to remember that the Melanesian Spearhead Group was set up especially to assist the decolonization of the remaining colonies in Melanesia, more specifically for New Caledonia, which is now well on its way to decolonization. It's had its referendums. It's part of a process that's internationally supervised, which is, so we can say that that process is now being achieved, it's happening. But for West Papua, we're seeing the situation getting worse. And the ULMWP does have observer status in the MSG. Indonesia has associate membership. And this is the only forum where both the Indonesian government and the United Liberation Movement of West Papua, which is recognized as the official representative of the people of West Papua asking for self-determination, are already in the same body. So we're calling on, Vanuatu is calling on the other Melanesian states to elevate the status of ULMWP at the next leaders meeting. The application has been submitted some years ago. It's now at the stage where it will be considered and decided upon by the leaders at the next MSG meeting. We need to provide ULMWP with the same status or full membership of the MSG so that it can be at the same table talking directly with Indonesia with support from the other Melanesian states. We need peaceful dialogue. We need dialogue between Indonesia and West Papua to find a way forward. And this is the forum that both parties are already in, and we can try and use it.
You're listening to Vanuatu politician Ralph Regenvanu, and I'm chatting with him about developments in West Papua at the moment. Mr. Regenvanu, you were saying there that the MSG, Melanesian Spearhead Group, is a forum potentially for peaceful dialogue between Indonesia and the West Papuan provinces. Do you think there's common ground for the independence movement and Indonesia? And if so, what will it take to get there to really hash it out and discuss these things?
It's difficult to imagine that there is common ground, given the position of the Indonesian government, which seems to be hardening on this issue. But we have to try. And failing Indonesia, sitting down in good faith to have these discussions, the international community continue to put on the pressure, has to ramp up the pressure to force Indonesia to deal with the situation. Remember that Myanmar just happened, and the president of Indonesia was instrumental in coming up within ASEAN countries with a consensus strategy for Myanmar, which was all about releasing political prisoners, ending military violence, dialogue, allowing humanitarian access. And this was in fact announced by President Jokowi. And so this is the same approach we want to see happening in West Papua. If Indonesia can advocate for that process to happen in Myanmar, then they should also apply the same process in West Papua.
Ralph Regenvanu, thank you very much for joining me here on Pacific Beat this morning.
Thank you.
That was Ralph Regenvanu, Vanuatu's opposition leader, also a staunch advocate